No, Tracy. I'm not sure he understands what.
This is the fun bit.
Yeah, we're not talking about what he thinks is fun.
It is. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, let's go.
You're going to be as question.
Absolutely.
Suggested one.
Tracy, wrong it and Jerry. Yeah. It isn't.
Well.
So the company.
Yeah. The final.
All right. Far away.
The presentation to come up first, but you can check there we go.
So we're going to stick to the next 24 minutes. We're going to fly through the annual plan for 26-27, the key project goals and budgets. So the overview of what we're doing today. Next slide, please, Wayne. The majority of this annual plan aligns with what we planned in the long-term plan. So this is year 2 of the long-term plan, and as long as this remains the case, then we won't need to consult. The average rates increase is currently sitting below the projected increase of 7.5. So it's currently sitting at 7.3% after the discount for growth. So prior to adjustment, that's 9.36. The draft annual plan will be sent to yourselves this afternoon in case you fancy some Christmas reading. So that is in draft. There are lots of things still to update in there, but the majority of it is in there. So what we want to do is provide you with an overview of the key projects and the budgets and how we've got to where we've got to. So right now we're at the point where we'll provide that draft plan. In January, fees and charges will be presented at the council meeting for approval. In February, we'll bring back the annual plan, excluding the rating information, so that that can be approved. March to June will be the process of reevaluations and factoring that impact in. And then in June, we'll bring the final annual plan for adoption. So I'll go straight into the slides which cover the key projects. So first up is water, wastewater and stormwater. So we've got upgrades and replacements across each of those sections. And we've got risk management plans which will be developed in the next financial year, as well as the metered water charge increasing to $2.40 from July. Roading and environmental are up next. Apologies, these are very wordy slides, and I am going to fire through to try and claw back some of this time. Throughout roading and environmental, we've got capital works for pile strengthening at Little Valley Bridge, the replacement of Bridge 145, which is currently a Bailey Bridge out in Maniatoto, and some road reconstructions, as well as the progression of the organics processing plant. So there will be some work in this financial year to start that process, with procurement happening in the next financial year. On to planning and regulatory. There's a lot of
When's environment been put in their roading budget, or they keep separate for the intents and purposes of it?
Oh, they are separate. It's just for the purposes of this presentation, Stu, but a nice eagle eye because
Don't you worry about that. His eyes are sharp.
there are a few that have been combined to try and keep the slides as short
As long as the slides, it doesn't just slide into policy. Just saying.
Planning and regulatory. So across the planning space, there will be a lot of work to understand the reform. Once the final policy direction has been decided, the rural chapter review will be a big focus in the next financial year. And for regulatory, the compliance and assurance activities will be risk-based, and there is the implementation of the objective build system, which will modernise and improve building consent processing. Schools, parks and cemeteries. We've got renewals and maintenance across parks and pools. The preparation of, sorry, that was the next slide, please, Wayne. preparation of development plans and reserve management plans, as well as continued planting and new aquatic programs being planned. On the next slide, we've shoved a few together here: property, community facilities, service centres and libraries. So there's a lot going on. We've got the operation of the new Cromwell events facility and Dog Pound, and the Manahira Hub project continues through the next financial year. We're planning for the Roxburgh Entertainment Centre rebuild, as well as toilets and the Cromwell Town Centre redevelopment. There are the sales at Gare Avenue and Bannockburn. The implementation of some technology, so that's for property is the lease management system, and essentially service is the call centre AI enablement project and the website integration project. There'll also be continued refurbishment and maintenance at many of our sites. Yes, Tracy.
Question,
Yes.
elderly people's housing there. Have we ever asked the community, and this goes back, and I can't remember, someone might be able to tell me when. We did have some people, some elderly people say that they wanted to change their housing, but the typology wasn't available. So the smaller unit type arrangement. Have we ever gone out to a demographic and said, if there was some type of smaller housing and you're in a bigger housing, would you be interested in, is this something that you would, and we actually, you know how you talked about doing more elderly housing? I'm just
Bring that up, actually.
Just, have we ever asked the question?
I think one of the challenges that was found so far, because there is quite a lot of that happening in Alexandra where people are infilling.
Yeah.
The challenge is that people are in older houses that haven't been maintained and the price points are the same. To leave an older house that's still like original 1950s and go into a new double glazed 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom or whatever it be, they are a similar price point, and that's, I think, where those people are finding it difficult to get out of the house that they're into something else because they're not actually any cheaper.
Because other houses are put up in the high valuation, so they're too dear to do up and do everything. It's a value problem.
Well, they don't have the money to do them up,
Yeah.
and people are looking at it going, oh, it needs a new bathroom, needs a new kitchen. It's been fine for the old people who've lived there for 50 years, but people coming into those are looking at it going, oh, it's not really worth what. Those are the ones that seem to be sitting quite a lot at the moment.
But then it's a valuation issue, isn't it? If you're going to go to the market, well, I can't do that unless I go $300,000. They can't move to the next one unless they sell either.
Okay. All right, keep going.
Next up is community economic and strategic development. So we've got regional identity and district vision rollouts, as well as the implementation of the new communication and engagement strategy and development of the Ranfurly community plan. And there will be some discussions around operating models and in the museum and arts and heritage sector. Next up, we've got governance and corporate. So we've got people and culture policy and framework development happening in the IS space. We've got lots of projects, so the data visualization and AI projects, including continued cybersecurity, information management and privacy protections, which is one of our big risk areas. The rating review will be a big piece of work for the finance team, and you'll be hearing a lot about that in workshops in the near future. But it's going to be the implementation of risk management software and continued collaboration on civil defence. And now I have sped through that. I will hand over to Gasewick to go over the budgets.
Here we go, right at the end of the day.
Right, so the next set of slides will focus on the rates to begin with, and then we'll move into where there are deviations from the year 2 of the LTP in terms of changes to the budgets. So we set out, so this graph is showing you what the rates required are for the next year, compares it to what the long-term plan said for the year 2 and for the year 1. As we covered in the beginning, the proposed rates rise is 7.3 after accounting for growth, but it was proposed to be 7.5 in the long-term plan. In dollar terms, that's an extra $5.6 million in rates revenue from this year to the next year that's required. And we'll talk more about the changes that are happening from the year 2 budgets, but overall, to minimise the rates increase, we have used some of the district reserves to offset the proposed rates increase. And most of those district reserves are sitting in planning, regulatory and tourism space. But this is a one-off adjustment that's been applied to the draft annual plan. If we could go to the next slide, Wayne. So this kind of shows you how the proposed $65.7 million in the rates that we're saying we're going to collect for the next year. How do we plan on spending it? So roughly 58% of the rates are going to be spent across water, wastewater, roading, environmental services, and that comes up to around $38 million. And the remaining 42% is going to be across all the remaining activities. Now, this split is quite consistent with what we are doing for the current financial year, so there isn't a whole lot that is moving between this year to the next year. We could go to the next slide, Ryan. Now, this chart is showing you what the 7.3, what it is made up of. So when we say the rates are going to be increasing by additional 7.3%, it tells you where are those increases coming from. So overall, 71% of that 7.3 is across water, wastewater, pools, parks and cemeteries, and environmental services. Those activities are majority funded through targeted fixed charges, meter charges, or general fixed charges. So it is quite crucial to understand where the rates increase is skewed towards which activities, as if the rate is increasing across activities that are targeted funded, then the properties that on which those targeted rates are levied are likely to see a disproportionate increase to what the average rates increase is going to be. There are a couple of outliers in this increase. One of them is planning and regulatory, which is a negative 0.04%, and that's just where we are using their operational reserves for the next year to offset some of the rates. And pools, parks and cemeteries, you might have covered it in your annual report earlier in the day, that the changes to the revaluations and which impact the depreciation is driving the change in the increase that's we're seeing across those activities as well. If you could go to the next slide, please. Now, this wonderful graph, what that is showing you is it's comparing the operational cost for in the annual plan, and it's comparing it against what was said in the long-term plan for year 2, and it's showing you where things are moving. You can see there are some movements happening across pools, parks and cemeteries, planning, regulatory, governance, environmental and community engagement. So overall, it's a 4% increase to the operational expenditure, and that comes to around $2.3 million. The changes in pools, parks and cemeteries, planning and regulatory, those changes are driven by the changes to the personnel cost, and those are being covered through increases in expected user fees and income to an extent. In environmental services, there is increase in the projected transfer station operational cost, and those are again being funded. Those increases are partially being funded through increase in expected user fee revenue and other income. In community, economic and strategic development, there is a small increase coming across, and that is driven by the budgets to review the operational model for community spaces for museum, art and heritage, and also including the budget for the proposed citizens' assemblies. In the governance and corporate services, which is where the biggest changes coming from, around 9%. So those are again changes coming through operational cost and personnel cost. In the operational spaces, the professional services for rates review, LTP policy work, audit fees. In the operating space, that is coming through increase in cost related to user information and communication technology support. So that includes demand from business for additional information technology tools, cost for digital storage, and the cost of user devices. And it also includes the cost for adding some more roles to support those increases as well. You could go to the next slide, please. So outside of those operational changes, there are other operating expenditure movements happening in this annual plan. The biggest one is the changes to the proposed borrowing cost, which for the current financial year, we are saying we're going to be peaking at $4.3 million in terms of borrowing. And for the next financial year, we're estimating it will be around $4.7 million. It is less than the proposed borrowing cost in the LTP for year 2 of $5.6 million. So there is a reduction there. And this reduction is primarily driven by the reassessment of the requirements around external debt, the timing of the debt uplift, as we're not going to uplift the entire debt of 1 July. We'll probably be phasing it a little bit. The changes to the interest rate assumptions, as the interest rates have come down, we reassessed interest rates against the available swaps on council borrowing, and we just readjusted it down a little bit. And we also have the council credit rating, which is also assisting in some better borrowing rates as well. The other changes coming through the changes to the projected depreciation expense. So we did revalue majority of asset classes as part of 30 June 2025. And part of that, there was an overall change in the value of assets, around $65 million that are depreciable. As part of the revaluation, we also relooked at the asset useful lives, and those were also refreshed, and the values of the assets. Alongside the carry forwards from last financial year into this financial year, which were around $18 million. So those factors led into the reassessment of what we think the depreciation expense is going to be for the next year. And there is an overall $600,000 movement from what we said in the long-term plan for next year to what we now think where we land for the next year. What this chart is also showing you is of the proposed depreciation expense of $25.9 million, we are going to be funding $14.5 million through rates. So we're not funding 100% of the depreciation that we're proposing for next year.
We're funding the rest.
So part of that is roading, which we're only funding at 49% because the 51% is through the NZTA share. And part of that is the borrowing that is being uplifted in water and wastewater space, where the depreciation was meant to be funded through borrowing as part of the LTP.
Last Christmas.
So overall, it's around around 56% of the depreciation expense that is being funded the next annual plan.
Is that sustainable full time? Because effectively depreciation is there to replace an asset for life over time. And if you're going to be effectively doing it out of borrowing, why aren't we borrowing anyway?
Well, I guess
One or the other, don't you?
yeah, I guess the answer to that is that the council's been in a fortunate position prior to a couple of years ago where it was funding depreciation, and that was sufficient. And it's now moved into a position where it needs to borrow money. So you can either fund depreciation and fund more of it, or fund it through borrowing and put in a repayment program. We kind of haven't had a repayment program in place until this LTP for our borrowing. So because you have to have the headroom to be able to keep doing that over the long period. So you've got to pay back what you borrow.
And I guess the revaluations are making it hard for us to appreciate because we just picked up 600,000 depreciation.
Yeah.
And then you'd argue, like we're never going to catch up.
No. And the thing is, the only asset that we probably will end up with right now that we could start from scratch and depreciate from day one will be the hall in Cromwell, because it's not being built. Everything else has kind of started from about the year 2000-ish, something like that, when funded depreciations.
In a lot of ways, that's masked our rate rises for the last 30 years. We didn't fund even bridges for depreciation. When they come into use, we haven't got it. So because we didn't do it, we need to borrow. But now we're borrowing to fund depreciation.
We're not depreciating the whole straight away either though, are we?
Should be.
No, we're not.
No.
We should, yeah. I
Does
Should be.
should
There's
It
a
should be.
time lag,
I
and
think
that was part of the funding because we're borrowing, wasn't it?
But it still should be funded the part of it to the ratepayer for the
Yeah.
life of the
Well, it's
vehicle
gonna
to
be even
start.
more if we do that. No,
Yeah.
we've definitely made a decision there to not.
Yeah, but I mean,
Right, isn't
in the real world, you should be.
Oh, yeah,
But
yeah,
it was-
absolutely, but we've made that decision to.
You're robbing Peter and Peter again to try to pay Paul.
I'm happy for you to pay.
Hey?
I'm happy for you to pay.
But I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
Once, you've got to be
Quite
careful that
literally
you
what
don't
I'm
get,
doing.
you don't get to the stage where it's just everything debt driven. Because you're just accumulating debt to offset rate rises.
Into a spark.
Yeah, and I guess the follow on from that is that, as you said, depreciation effectively we'd revalue every 3 years, and then it got the distance between revaluation starting to shrink, and now it's every year. So the impact on rates would be you might have a stable rate line for the next 3 years as your revaluations come in and you kind of know what's happening. But now it's, you know, we've just had 66 million increase in value of assets. You know, even if that's at 2%, that's 1.2 million in depreciation kind of thing.
This is 2% of the rates.
2% of the rates.
So your depreciation alone would just take out the government's lifting the rates if we depreciate it.
Some councils don't depreciate.
Yeah.
Well, don't fund depreciation, and they just borrow. But they have a repayment program in place for the borrowing, because they obviously need to retire debt to borrow more. And what you don't really want to do is just keep borrow, and your debt levels go up. You actually want to be able to pay that down at some stage. So, but if you've got in the position where you are funding depreciation,
Keep funding it.
keep funding it, because it's really hard to get it back.
Yeah.
Really hard to get it back.
How many more slides have we got? I don't want to leave.
We're
Stephen.
about to wrap.
Oh, was that your last slide?
No, he's got 40 more.
I got,
It's okay.
there's only 3 more. Right, so if we could go to the next one. So this is just showing you what the capital expenditure is overall across the in terms of the LTP for the next year and what the annual plan is saying. There is some minor movements coming through around $1.2 million. Part of that is the deferment of some of the earthquake strengthening work as they reassess the requirements under the new legislation. And there is also the reforecast of the organic facility from current year, last year into the next year, as it aligns more with the procurement and the expected procurement of the project as well.
He spoke to that in there.
If you could go to the next one, Wayne. Now, this one is a bit small, but it's just showing you where the revenue movements are happening. So we covered the cost. This is more focused on where the revenue, which doesn't include rates, vested assets, development contributions and interest. And we can see where we expect some changes to come through. The majority of changes that are happening across schools, parks and cemeteries, planning and regulatory and environmental services, these are just driven by the expected uplift and the expected revenue from user fees and charges. Part of that, the 86% jump in environmental services is the external funding to fund the organics plant project as well, which is something that's been reforecasted into next year as well. And that is all I had. If we go to the next slide. So these are possible next steps in the annual plan process. We're currently going through the forecast 2 process across the council. So that could possibly look into changing some of the capital expenditure, which is currently sitting in initiation phase and is unlikely to be completed by this year. We're incorporating into the annual plan. There's still some unknowns in terms of the debt requirements for the water CCO and any impact from regional deals that could have in this plan. And then there are other considerations that will be brought to you early next year.
In terms of those last 2 statements, So this document here that you will be getting a copy of today. This has got the guts of it in terms of program and the financials. What it doesn't have yet are the rates, because we go through a revaluation process from QV. So we won't know what the the valuation increases are until early next year. So we've not done anything with rates or sample properties because they're going to change as soon as the revals come through. So the proposal is, and it's not optional, Christmas reading. This is for your Christmas reading. And we will come back early next year and take your comments, and you either are going to say, yep, we're happy with it, or no, we're not, and these are what we would like to see. And then we will park that if you're okay with it. Then we move on to the long-term plan, because we can't run this and the long-term plan together. We will then come back and start talking rates and setting the rates for 2026, 27, probably April, May, June, sometime around that. June will then combine them both, and that will be your document that you will adopt and allow you to set the rates from. So there are no rates details in here. It's more about program of work and what it looks like from a financial perspective.
Any questions?
So many. Keep reading.
Yeah. Reading. Yeah.
So we don't plan on any substantial changes. That mean we're consulting on this annual plan?
Ideally, we won't, because then all of the team's focus can go on the long-term plan, which is so
And that's
significant.
still there.
So that's, I think, the aim still. We want to free up as much time as we can for the long-term plan, especially some of those big things that are going to be going into it, like no 3 quarters. So if we can keep at 7.5 or below and nothing significant that's going to trigger our engagement policy, then I think that would be the best outcome for our people. Plus, we'll save money on consultation. And so long as it's kind of what we said we were going to do, and we had the best ever engagement on the long-term plan. I don't know how many people looked at years 2 and beyond, but that's what we said we were going to do in it. So if we can keep to that, I think that's a better outcome.
That's the objective, to stuck as close as we can to the LTP year 2. And as you've said, it was consulted on, and yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We don't usually print out agendas, but given that you can't get it on your Kindle, if anybody does need a copy of the annual plan in a hard form for your Christmas reading, just let Wayne know. You can
Wrap it up and post it to us.
Hammock reading.
Well,
Thanks, guys.
Amelia's bound to put a bloody post-it with
you. And then our last workshop for the day is Stephen joining us online, isn't he?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
He is online, ready to go.
Oh, perfect.
Can you hear me?
We can, yes. Good afternoon. And great timing, Stephen, because we just resolved earlier today to undertake a rate review. So how fortuitous that you're here.
Oh, what a surprise.
It's good.
Perfect. Far away.
Right. You gonna say anything, Paul?
I've introduced Stephen before. This is a continuation of the previous workshop. So Stephen's going to share some slides. We will box through those slides, and I guess you'll take questions at any time, or do you want them left to the end?
No, anytime.
So once we've gone through that, I guess it's open for discussion. Given that we've got a hard close at 10 to 5, it'd be really good if we could have a hard close earlier than that, to be fair. But I'll leave that to you, Stephen.
Good one. Right. Right. Has the slide pack turned up?
No, not yet, not yet.
It's a wee bit slow on this new system, getting it up and running.
That's good. Looks like you're sharing the wrong screen.
Might be sharing the wrong screen. Okay.
Yeah, I think you're sharing the screen. Yeah.
I need to. I'll put that over there. You see something now?
Yep.
Oh, good. Right.
Right. Yep. Sweet. Cool.
Yep, all good?
Yep.
Marvelous. Right, just a quick recap from the last meeting, where hopefully we got a good understanding of the rating policy. We heard some of your views through that, and I've doubled up this in the slide pack in terms of next steps. We looked at the law and how it's applied. We looked at the 25-26 rates and had an overview of that. And we talked about the importance of good process. So that's where we got to. So the next step, we were going to look at some of the Local Government Act stuff. This is a section 100 to 110 of the Local Government Act, and this is where all the financial stuff happens. So what I've got here is I've looked at it from the perspective of rates, and so there's two ticks where the policy has some relevance to rating, or one tick if it's slightly relevant, and some of those well, one of them is of no relevance, being the infrastructure strategy really. The big ones in here that we'll have a look at is section 101, financial management, section 102, the funding and financial policies, 103, the revenue and financing policy. So they're pretty core, and then the other thing at the bottom are the remissions policies. So just quickly moving through. Balanced budget requirement. So the funding mechanisms that we set up in rates could have some involvement in revenue versus expenses. So that's pretty straightforward. Rates is the funder of last resort as a general rule in local government, and so the budgets get balanced by the rates, and that's that connection there really. Financial management 101, really key thing there is about prudence. I just heard you talking about debt and things around debt and rates, and that's all about prudence as well. So that's good conversation that you had there. I take it everyone's comfortable with what prudence means. I've got my birds there hoping to give us some help there as to what prudence is. Prudence can be different from council to council depending on your circumstances and where you're at. Financial strategy. It's what you decide to do in a financial strategy. Ideally, the financial strategy comes first, and then the rest of the policies roll in after that. Not always practical to run it that way, but that should be giving us some direction as to what we're doing in rates to some extent as well. An important part of a financial strategy is you really only have 3 levers to play with. One of them is up and down with your service levels, more or less. The others, you get more income from somewhere or not, or you use debt. And then, like I said before, rates is the balancing item. And those knobs go up and down by the choices you make. This is a framework that I've developed to sort of try and pull that together. It shows that it's complex. You've got the revenue and financing policy sitting in the centre, the financial strategy running around the outside, and then you've got all of these policies flying around on the inside, and they're all dependent on each other in many a case. So you need to have alignment for that and do the hard yards, and you end up with a rates resolution. So yes, it's complex. That's the job of staff to make sure that it's all working properly. It's very statutory, but there is a lot of flexibility in the legislation. If we get it wrong, it's expensive. Many councils have got it wrong. They've had to go to Parliament and spend hundreds of thousands getting the legislation passed to allow their mistakes of the past to be rectified. So it's important that we do those processes properly. Right, moving into some more detail. Section 1013 is a really important piece of legislation. Hello. Did someone say something? No? No. The funding needs analysis of a local authority must be met. Get rid of that. Must be met from the sources that the local authority determines to be appropriate, following consideration of a list of things that we'll look at shortly. That's really important piece of legislation in terms of how we fund the business. Council must meet them from the sources. The sources are listed in the Local Government Act, but particularly it is up to local authorities to determine what is appropriate. That's a very wide-ranging power where every council can choose to define appropriate for their community differently from everyone else. And yeah, it helps us do what we need to do for our community. What's not appropriate? This is really interesting because just up the road, Mackenzie District Council in 1992 pushed things too far, and they lost their case against ECNZ, and they were unreasonable. And the court said that it was perverse, absurd, outrageous, and in the defiance of logic. So that's a really high threshold in terms of what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. And there hasn't been another case that has successfully taken a council decision away from council, because everyone else has stayed under the threshold of being perverse, absurd, outrageous, and the defiance of logic.
It's ain't high.
But that's just because they were too big to even.
No, what Mackenzie tried to do was they said, oh, here's a big player. We'll get them to pay 60% of our rates. That was the basic premise of it, and everybody else pay a lot less. And ECNZ took them to court over that, and that's, I mean, 60% is a all of those. It's very unreasonable. So that's why they lost.
On the other hand, we've seen an Auckland court case and the Wairau court case in recent years where this principle has been withheld by with judges. It still stands.
And I guess where does the point unreasonable come? Where is it a percentage of the rates or and I guess that's what's been my driver, is it what is the level of it as an industrial? I mean, you'd argue that they'd have to pay something more than a residential.
Yeah, that was confirmed, but in the ECNZ's case, they weren't 60% of the value of the district for a start.
Yeah.
So that was, you know, let's apply capital value, except we'll give you 60% of all the rates. I'm sure that Stephen's going to talk about, there was the Wellington case that actually kind of said, yes, Wellington, you are being reasonable in being able to charge a differential to, I think it was Meridian or it was Woolworths or someone like that. So the courts have confirmed that, but they've also said, and I might be stealing Stephen's thunder here, but they've also said you have a political ability to make decisions that are reasonable. So you can charge different classes of ratepayer, different things. So that's where you get your differentials from.
I think we know we're not going to get 60% of our rate take out of any one entity.
I'd suggest that
Yeah.
we need to brief Duncan if we were going to be doing something like that.
Yeah, and there's been some court cases. The Wellington case that goes back the longest is I can't remember the date. It's back in the 80s, I think. And that was the business sector trying to take down the business rates that were 8 times more than residential rates. And despite that, the judge said, no, that's okay. It's this Mackenzie court case where it was clearly the reason or the rationale behind what is inappropriate is there. And then we had, most recently, we had the Auckland court case over accommodation that went to the highest courts in the land, and Auckland Council won that. They were allowed to make the charge as a targeted rate, so that was just on one targeted rate. And then there's a Wairau case that I was involved in, where council had evidence to support that the outcomes from forestry for Wairau were negative, and it was appropriate for council, having gone through all their processes and had consultation with the community and with the foresters. They charged the foresters a significant increase because of the negative outcomes that the community was getting from them. And that went to the top and came back, yes, you can do that. So lots and lots of choice for council to make.
I guess the question I've got is, out of all of that understanding you've been involved with, is there a format for likes of us? And I guess this is where I've been driving the whole way, is we know that we're going to have large industrial businesses of which our community is 60-40 split on how they see that value. And while ECNZ in 1992, what was the outcome that was acceptable by government or ECNZ? Because you could apply the same as Wairau to mining, for example, because we know mining's going to come at us as a rate. Is it 2 times the residential mining household rate they pay on a capital value? And the same would be lots of solar farms. If Blackridge investment groups put in $1 billion in Ranfurly, is the capital value of that product $1 billion? And if it's 3 times the rate of a unit of the house in Ranfurly, how do we determine? And I guess that's a question I've always wanted to ask, is where is a percentage of the ratepayer in the region that an industrial shaped business of foreign investment magnitude or government investment, how do we pick that up in a fair and equitable, admittedly not 60% of the total rate, but it could be.
And Stephen might have an answer, but that's interesting from my experience as Senior Counsel. So the Wairoa case, I just looked at it earlier on, that was 4, a ratio of 4. And when I was in Upper Hutt, some of the councils around us were charging 3.7% differential on 3.7 on business. So businesses were charged 3.7, and they justified that, and it was always an argument.
And I guess that answers my question.
So it's up to the councils to determine it.
3.7 times.
Yeah, 3.7 times residential's 1, they were 3.7, and that's
quite big.
It's quite big. But again, Lower Hutt stuck to their guns, and that's the rate.
However, you could look at that.
I think where Mackenzie lost out was that they didn't sit down and work out the rationale behind why 60%. They saw ECNZ and said they can pay it, and that's what they charged. And I think that's what Stephen was talking about. There's a whole bunch of processes that you need to go through and get it right in your mind that yes, that's a fair charge for an industry sector, for argument's sake.
And this is where my problem is, because you're the first financial guy that I've talked to in the last 5 years that would get any sense out of thinking about this way. And I've gone to previous financial people and in our council and CEOs to say, well, we should be looking at this because this stuff is coming at us, and we've never been able to pull that trigger. And
I'm not sure I should take that as a compliment.
Well, I think it is a big compliment because we're actually having this conversation now.
Yeah. Look, and I think people shy away from
friction,
making rates complicated, like doing this type of thing, because it does cause friction. You've had every time we put out an average rates rise, and they're just standard rates, people get uptight. If you're going to turn around and say, a particular industry has negative effects on the community, therefore we are going to charge them a differential to mitigate some of those or pay for some of those effects, that's going to cause friction. Nobody likes paying any more than they really have to. But it comes back to, if you've thought it through and you think that that is the thing that you want to do, then we will go through the process and put those things in place. I think that the courts have shied away from, because we haven't had a Mackenzie since then. We've had people who have put up differentials, and Wellington was one against, I think it was Meridian, the wind farm on the heads. They're different. They treated the land as commercial rather than rural because it had wind farm on it. And they were able to charge a differential. So as long as you go through the process and map the logic of what you're trying to achieve, we tend to avoid the Mackenzie case, and you can get 3.7. I think Meridian's one was a 6. Again, it comes back to the logic. Sorry, Stephen.
Yeah, cool. So funding needs analysis is section 1013 of the local government of the Act, and the processes we need to run through are very detailed. It's a 2-step process, and the first thing that we need to do in our funding needs analysis is look at community outcomes, Bennett. Oh, hang on, I've got another slide for that. I'll come back to that. So you got 2 parts. You do the first part, which is very detailed at an activity level, and then you go to the second part, and this is part that hasn't been used very well across the sector, where you can look at the overall impact of the allocation of liability for rates for the needs of current and future community. Those words that are in with the yellow on them, those are the words that are coming out of this section as a result of the local government systems improvement bill, which is in its second reading at the moment. So there's a change in words there that I don't think make a significant difference in what we're doing. And we'll look at that in a little shortly. But these are big deal in terms of having your rates right. So this is the step one part of it, and these are the 5 things that are in the legislation that we must consider. There's no priority between any one of them, and so we've got to look at community outcomes, and this is another piece that hasn't been well done in the sector. But community outcomes can have, in order to achieve your community outcomes, there may be some choices you make in funding. For example, and this is an example from a rural council up north that had issues with people's low-income people, and so they chose to put 10% of water and rates, water and wastewater into the general rate, which meant farmers were picking up those services, because so much of the investment in the water and wastewater services is about the environment and making sure the rivers and all of that are in good condition. And so they felt the whole community benefited from all of that, and at the same time that move to the general rate from what was a fixed rate supported the community outcomes that they were wanting. They had a 50-year plan, a 30-year plan that had outcomes that were about people's well-being, and that's their choice that they made that change. Benefit is an interesting one, whether it's a community as a whole, parts of the community, whether it's individual or a mix of those things. But the thing that's very different about benefit today from when this legislation was passed is the community has got a lot more diverse. And so it's not, benefit isn't something that is always clear and obvious to everyone. And apparently there are 6% of New Zealanders that are vegans, and vegans don't like beef farming, for example. And so their view of that and the benefits of beef farming would be different from that of the farmer themselves. So that's a pretty crude example, but sort of simple and obvious. But we've got that right through our communities now, and so benefit is subjective. Is the important thing here. It is not clear to everyone that it's the same thing, and so part of your process will be considering benefit. When they benefit, that's pretty easy, and that's the decisions to use debt intergenerational equity. Those sorts of words pop out when we're dealing with that. Exacerbator pays is where someone's actions or inactions create a problem. The regular example of that would be waste management. Interestingly, Waste Management Act is the only act that allows you to charge more than the cost of the activity. That being said, Wairau didn't need that piece of legislation to get their extra charges onto farming, onto forestry. And then the last one is an administrative thing, the cost weighing the benefits of doing that. And every now and then the council comes up with a grand idea and does a whole lot of work to discover that there's more work in administering the rate than or the funding source, because this applies to revenue as well as rates. So yeah, sometimes it's not worth collecting the money because it costs more. So we've got to do that for every activity. The step 2, the overall impacts of the allocation of the liability come through to the community, and that's really powerful. It's for council to decide whether they should reallocate the rates from the analysis they've just done under step 1, and it's this piece of the legislation that Wairau used in their defence, and they used it from the front when they put up their proposal. So if it supports the revenue needs of future community and council thinks it's appropriate, then you can modify the work that you've already done. Very powerful. So the process, things that matter, decision making, that we do that well, that we engage and consult well, that we do the 1013 analyses, and we put all that into the revenue and financing policy, and then we set the rates. Get any one of those 5 things wrong, and we could be struggling if we're challenged on something. So in summary, the framework is complex, it's a big deal, got a lot of work to do, there's a lot of judgments. Every council is different. We looked at that with some of those slides last meeting. Strong principles help us to develop a coherent policy. So, group of happy people there.
Completely empty thought bubbles. Not the best reflection of that.
Right.
Not put that out publicly.
Thoughts? No.
Thoughts. So, what does appropriate look like for Central Otago? Does anyone have a view on what equity looks like?
Mine pays 60%. Sorry,
Contact energy, the rest.
and contact energy can pay 35. That's solar farm. That's leaving 5% for the solar farm. Then we got this sewn up. It's got
So equity is an interesting thing. Again, I'm going to go to the changing environment of society, and different people have different views on what equity has. And so as part of our process, we need to work through it and get a collective understanding of what we mean by equity and how we will modify the rates potentially to support that. Ability to pay is another interesting concept. In your risk and assurance meeting the other day, Bruce Robertson finished the public part of that with interesting thoughts about ability to pay and the impact of the amount of spending that's going to happen through water rates versus what's left. We don't have a great science for ability to pay in the sector. Back in 2007, there was a report written called the Shand Report, and that said that ability to pay was when rates were under 5% of household income. And as a sector, that has largely been a number that we've sort of sat on because we haven't had any alternate number. And Bruce made reference to this 5% number in that risk meeting. So how that plays out with the moving of the waters and how that affects what's left will be an interesting part of our review. Cost of living is obviously a big deal. I think it probably sits together with ability to pay in our thoughts. Benefit is always on the cards, and I've talked about that already. Exacerbated pay we've talked about, and intergenerational equity was talked about earlier when you're talking about your debt plans. So, some things to think about. What of the 2025 rates are not fit for purpose? We had some conversation about that last meeting, and looking to move some things into the general rate, perhaps. So there's some other parts of the rates we probably want to look at some more in the new year. Do the rates support council's community outcomes and other policies? That's something that's often overlooked, and there's opportunities there. And what are the funding principles? So that is all the talking. That's what happens when you get AI to do a Graham Sydney.
Pretty good. Pretty good.
That's awful.
I thought it was pretty good for AI.
Right. Right, that's me
When you're on.
done talking. I've got to push that. There we go. Get rid of that. There we go. I'm with Paul.
I guess, are there any questions for Stephen? I can talk a little bit about the where to from here for the staff side of things. I suspect that there's a workshop in the new year on your horizon to start thinking about questions that Stephen's asked in terms of rates and what ones do you think are fit for purpose or aren't? Where do you see some issues with equity across the rate paying base? And I wouldn't necessarily just focus on how do we get rates out of the mining or the solar, because that will fall out of it naturally. I think it's more about we've got an opportunity here to look at the whole lot. What problems do you see with the rates that we currently levy? And given that you kind of get a once in a lifetime opportunity to have a look at this, and the removal of Three Waters has given us that, because I think we would have to look at rebalancing at some point and at least doing a funding needs analysis, because you would have the potential argument from the rural sector, for argument's sake, well, hey, we're now paying a lot more of the total than we would, and we would need to be able to be justifying that anyways. I think that we will be, Stephen and I, having a conversation on Friday about what the next steps are from a practical perspective. And then it's putting together a program so that the council can have, you guys have got to lead this. We're going to put the facts there. You guys need to tell us what you want to do with those.
I guess some of the things you hear on the way through that frighten you. Stephen said growth is a fantastic thing. We must have growth, but I don't think we can manage growth that we're probably seeing coming down our channel. And rates won't catch up with growth. And intergenerational debt or borrowing is how you fund growth. I totally agree, but I also think if we want to slow the growth, how do we have a mechanism where we can have growth at a controlled rate that we catch up? Because depreciation is a collective. We're actually now finding we can't fund depreciation. So we may have to have that conversation, don't depreciate and just do all that out of debt. But I'm not going to go back to what we talked about before. The reason we're using our bank account for the Southern Water done well because we've got debt movement that others haven't. So it's just a race to who can have maximum debt. Now, your comments you made about people going to government to have discussions was either get their debt level adjusted or palming off some of their bad debt to government. So my concern is that the growth we are going to have, unless we use rates as a mechanism, to slow it, and whether you like it or not, rates as a tax, well, it actually is a capital gains tax and drag. So why don't we have capital gains tax in Central Otago on the rating base so our ratepayers get everything they want and the speculator from the Tauranga Development Company comes along and they actually pay their capital value forward. 38% of Clyde and of Bannockburn are absentee landlords. So the only mechanism we have to actually get their rates to pay for the swimming pool and the bike parks and the kids' dog parks is charge them a higher rate and let our community have the asset. All right, and it is a capital gains tax. And
Hold on. So hold on. Did I just hear you right that you were saying that people who are absentee landlords are going to pay more?
No, they pay a high tax because they're living in Christchurch and Dunedin.
They just pay
Pay
the
the
rates,
rate.
the same as what everybody else
We
does.
try to look at alternative funding. They don't get to pay the rate. So we're actually robbing all our community assets and other businesses. Not robbing them, but, if you take, say, Goldmine and Royalties, they benefit. They get a tax subsidy. So if you've got the bike park at Clyde and we've done up our streetscapes and we've done all that stuff there, and you live and you're a brain surgeon in Auckland or in the Philippines, you pay a high rate. Well, Central Otago's lovely and high, but our community benefits for the assets we're giving them. The rates is the only thing that picks that up, I guess I'm saying. And we're going to be capped at government level. I understand that too. But it does actually provide a capital that they're paying forward. The developer will pay it forward in the development contribution, which Peter's saying the name might change. Have it as high as you want to have a 6% growth instead of a 12% growth. That's all I want to get out of this is how do we get an equitable system? Because if Julie was right, she's not here now, but there's park burn up the road and there's thousands of sections going to come on. That will give our kids the paths around things and do it like it's, they have to pay more for what they're doing to come here because they're speculating on a tax-free environment when they profit out of selling an asset in the house. You don't pay tax when you sell your house. You sell $1 million worth of wool or milk, you pay 39 cents in the dollar. But the building industry is speculating only on capital value. That's why it's so expensive. So we're the only taxation that can actually take that money and give back to our kids in our bike parks.
So what you're meaning is a differential on holiday homes?
Well,
No, I don't think we can go anywhere near that.
No, but I'm trying to.
Yeah, I'm trying to get where that.
All I'm saying is, eh?
That's the realize.
But you know what? The irony of that is if you're an absentee, if that house is not really being used, then they're not driving on the road. They're not arguably using the
That's
services.
the counter argument. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
arguably they're not costing, when you.
You get something out of them for nothing.
Yeah.
Yes.
The only thing that what
From a
you're
renting
saying
perspective,
is
but
development
from a-
contributions, the only thing that can slow that growth down and make it manageable.
Yeah, and if they pay more for that, because the lady on Bridge Hill over here, she's paying 20% of her rates into development contribution, depreciation on a water scheme in Clyde that she's never had to use. And the growth is never going to catch up. So the development contribution should be 100% of development. because they're passing that on for profit.
Yeah, but that's different from what we're talking about here. This is rates.
But
This is rates.
if we subsidise rates, and that's effectively what you're doing, the rate's the only thing that picks it up. That's what I'm saying.
Well,
And we're trying to now cut rates back.
well, that's the other factor is you've got a cap, potential cap
Yep.
coming in. But I guess it's following on from what you've said, Stu, is for argument's sake, is land value the best way to capture
That,
growth
that development.
value? Because the value of growth is not necessarily in the land,
It's in the.
it's what they put on the land. So is there an argument to say we want to, and all it's going, just remember back to the original first session we had, we've got a pie. We're not increasing the size of the pie necessarily. All we're doing is cutting it up differently, and certain people are paying either more or less. So are we actually saying that we want to look at how, you know, the current situation where a general rate is valued at land value? Should we be looking at capital value, because that's going to shift some of the burden from the rural sector that is just basically land rich, and into the urban sector, which is, compared to the rural sector, land poor. Whereas if you start throwing the capital value on, you know, you sell a section for $500,000, you put a $1 million house on it easily. So that's the type of thing we should be looking at.
Yeah, and I guess in that'll pick up the developer. Because the developer isn't me and you that are going down there. They're massive $1 billion businesses that are going to take that profit because they're selling a house asset. They're tax exempt on the government side. It picks that up. And then the developer sells it on, so they sell on, then they pay us a rate. Then the ratepayer goes in and gets the services that they're paying for. But
So I guess, yeah.
it picks up the developer in a rating base.
So it comes back to the first point of equity. Where do you see the equity? Does our current system provide equity? Because I think growth actually is good if you can tax it the right way.
Yeah.
Right. Because the principle is if the level rises, everybody rises with it in terms of the payment side of things. You know, someone else is coming in and they're paying their share, which means my share is slightly reduced because we've got someone else coming in. So I don't necessarily think growth's a bad thing. I think the issue then becomes, well, we're currently valuing it on land value, or we're currently charging a fixed charge for this, regardless of the value of your property. Community facilities, for argument's sake. Does that give us the equity that we need? Or should we actually be looking at saying, for argument's sake, the urban people get more out of it? So what we will do is we will charge, and I'm just throwing this out, I haven't thought about this, we'll charge a fixed charge across the district, and that might be about $982 that we currently collect from everybody. We'll charge $200. That recognises that anybody can come into the town or wherever and use the facilities, or they're contributing towards the greater good of the district, and then levy the balance on a variable charge so that the people who are closer, and when I say variable charge, you create a differential for the town, not leave it to the farms. Those are the types of things we can do if you think that it's unfair the way we're currently charging.
Well, when you say that, I'm just thinking about another recommendation. Is you do what you're talking about there. But if we're worried, and I'm worried about growth, I don't think anyone else, the person building the houses isn't worried about growth, and it's a great thing. But can we have a differential? And I brought this up with Trace the other day about Queenstown. Queenstown can't sustain growing the way it is with its infrastructure. Do we have a differential of any house built after the first week in January in 2026 that they pay 1.2% of the rate? House rate. So increase the value on the speculative market from Christmas Eve.
It probably brings into account one on your last slide, the cost to administer something.
Well, I said, if building consent that hasn't been done by the 25th of March, it's like a land schedule. They set it on a Friday. Next week, you have to deal with it. So if you want the benefit to come forward, 1.2% of the rate on development, because we ultimately, the lady sitting over here in Bridge Hill, she's paid for the development on that plant, water plant 4 times.
Yeah,
So 1.4 or 1.5, if you've got 10,000 sections coming in, the general ratepayer is going to get a real benefit of the growth that's coming as a percentage of their household rate as of Christmas Eve.
yeah, but the general ratepayers benefit, if you took that, and I'm not discounting that argument,
With the growth component.
their general rate should go down slightly because you've got more people.
Absolutely, but if they get subsidy, or not subsidised, but that actually part picks up the use of the depreciation or the use of the facilities, because they haven't used them yet. Admittedly, Tracy's right. If you live in Clyde and you haven't used them, the services stay the same and you get more rate.
What you're saying though is a fair way to capture this growth component in the district is to move the general rate from land value to capital value.
That's a way to do it. I'm not saying that's the only way.
But it's probably it would catch more of that growth than the current system.
But I think what Stephen's asking is you've actually identified an issue, growth. How do we deal with that?
Piece of paper.
We're going to identify an issue, the differential between rural and urban. Do you see that as an issue? If it is, that's something you need to think about over the break to come back and say, I really think that this is a problem. How can we solve it? Do we have an issue with community facilities, for argument's sake, being racked in at $982 for everybody in the district when there are probably users closer to the facility that pay the same as a high country station at Terrace? Those are the types of questions I think you need to ask yourself and see whether you're comfortable with what we currently do. And that's really what Stephen was asking. We have a current set of rates. Do they make sense to you? And if they don't, what do you see that doesn't make sense, and how do you want to address those problems?
If you ask any ratepayer, they'll say no.
One of the things I see is that you charge some of your rates on capital value and then there's your one anomaly. And I look at rates in Dunedin, Queenstown Lakes District Council, they're all charged on capital value. Same rates, but the method is.
We're in the minority, and we're not saying the minority in land value. It's not a tiny minority. There are still a few.
No, Stephen had the map before. Yeah.
So you can see people moving towards it.
I just think like you pick your horse, you know?
Yeah. But again, you pick your horse on what you're trying to solve.
Yeah. But we picked 2 horses. It's probably.
Yeah. And I think because we've got growth, you've got 500 sections being built or being produced in Cromwell, for argument's sake. They're going to be roughly the same value. They're not going to differentiate a lot. What's going to differentiate is what people put on them.
Yeah. And that's what Stu's getting on about. The eye surgeon in Auckland who builds the $2 million house should pay more than the 30-year-old husband and wife with the young kid next door with the smaller house.
Or if you've got the place in Clyde you were talking about, absentee homeowners, right? They're paying roughly the same because the land values are the same, roughly. If you put them on capital value, they'll still pay a similar amount, but depending on what you've put in, but they're contributing more to the services. Yeah. They're not using the services, so the person who lives here
gets the benefit of
services. So those are the types of things.
And that's all I want, is because if we don't, we're going to turn around when Charlie said, no, we want to stop putting these rates up. We're going to cut the services. We actually want the services to stay the same, but a bigger pay by someone else.
Yeah. So
they're not using the service.
No, but they're choosing to buy here, and I'm saying they're choosing to buy here because we're one of the fastest growing regions by value. They come in here for capital value gain in their business. And
it could be argued we're all in the same boat.
Absolutely. And the argument for that, to that, is that there's no way that that property market gets taxed. Now, the Ranfurly values in the Ranfurly housing market doubled in the last 2 years. It wasn't because the wages doubled, it was because of the speculative nature of people think it's the next place to go. And that's fine too. And then, you know, their rates, if it goes to capital value, they'll get picked up in the rates. The swimming pool will stay the same. The swings and slides will stay the same, but the rates will go up and make it more equitable for those people.
How are you going to make the dentists in Wellington pay more?
I'm not, but if they don't use the services, they still pay the rate.
Yes.
Once we cap their rates, and then you'll get a bike park, so our community gets to use the services of a high rate paying base. In other words, you're rating for 20,000 people, but actually only 15 are using the services. So we get all the services. And that's what I'm trying to get at.
But is that not what's happening now?
Oh, probably, but if is it a high enough rate for, or unless you, yeah. And I guess if you've got 1,000 sections of Parkburn and they're all sold and they're not sold to any locals in Central Otago and they're sold to the property speculator, they're paying the same rate that someone else has put all those services and develop the vineyards, develop everything else. How do you capture that growth to give our community everything like? If we want to have heated swimming pools around for it, they're heated, but it's split over a rate because the growth component of our community is coming from the historical good that our communities have done.
But on the same token, you've gone from 1 rate to 1,000 rates.
Yeah, I get that. But it's also, as long as the developer pays their share, because at the moment they only pay a percentage of the development contribution. I guess that's the balance. I'm not saying we should just ping anyone new comes in. But if we can pick up even a percentage of the new and subsidise the person who's been living here for 25 years.
Given that we've only got 3 minutes left before our hard close, I really want us to have a hard close. I think the takeaway is, and Stephen, jump in and correct me if I'm wrong, it's really have a think about probably a couple of things. Firstly, do you see inequity in our rating system as it stands right now? And that can be across all of it, and have a think about that. The second thing is, do you see the need for certain industries to pay more or even less, depending on what they are within the district? We can think of mining, we can think of solar farms, but there'll be other industries that we might want to encourage that we want to turn around and say, well, okay, we're going to give that a.
And I guess, can we have examples when you've talked about Wairau and Wellington and others? Can we have examples where it's been acceptable, not acceptable, so we get a bit of a guideline?
Well, it's always acceptable. I think, look, if you look at Wairau, theirs was forestry. There'll be other places around that might have a dairy issue, well, not an issue, they have more dairy farms, and there is the impact of a dairy tanker twice a day to a farm is the equivalent, one of those tankers is equivalent of 90 vehicle movements, right? So do they have a bigger impact on roading than you driving your ute up and down? Definitely. So those are the types of things you need to be thinking about. And I just want you to come up with your ideas, and then we can have a discussion around how that might feed into this. I don't think we want to solve any problem at the next meeting, but it's more gathering the stuff that you guys are concerned about so that we can then talk about how we might solve those concerns. Would that be fair, Stephen?
Yeah. I think we need to do some analysis ourselves and pull together some data to help that conversation. It's great to hear from the elected members about those things. Just as an aside, you can't set a rate by a date. We know that because of the court case up in Kaipara. So you can't set a rate by a date. But you know, there's a lot of interesting things in that conversation. Wellington City Council this last LTP introduced a rate for bare land in the CBD because developers weren't developing the land and they wanted it to be developed. I don't know that it's necessarily the best choice. In the end, it got quite watered down, but it's a It's a direction thing. So there's lots of opportunity to pull things apart and have a look at them. As someone said, we could be creating more trouble than what we've already got, but that's part of the process of working through and testing what works and what doesn't work.
It highlights that we've all got some homework and we need to go away and think about what are the problems that we're trying to solve, because we all know what the challenges are for our own respective areas, and then think about how we might like to address those, and then we'll pass that on to the ones and forums.
Yep.
Even if that works well.
That's great. That would be really good. Thank you, councillors. I know it's been a long day. I appreciate being able to fit this last one in before Christmas, so that you do have some work to do over Christmas and we don't. So that's fair enough.
Thank you.
It's not live, it's fine.
Stephen,
No
have you got
disappointment.
some
Thanks.
time?
Happy Christmas, just.
Thanks,
Thank you. See ya.
One. Oh,
Yeah.
exciting.